The last normal photograph in this story was taken at 10 to 7 on a Sunday evening in October, on somebody's phone, from the end of a dining table in a house in Hasbrook, Pennsylvania. There are 13 people in it. It is not a good photograph. 3 of them are blurred because they are moving. One of them has his eyes shut, and the flash has bounced off a glass door behind the table and put a white smear across the wallpaper. Somebody has just said something off frame. You can tell, because every face is turned about 15 degrees to the left, and every mouth is open in the same shape. At the center right of the frame, there is a woman of 62 in a green cardigan, and she is holding a baby against her shoulder. The baby is 7 months old. He is wearing a knitted thing with a duck on it, and he is looking directly into the lens with the flat, unimpressed expression that babies have, and one of his hands is closed around the collar of the cardigan. Everybody in that photograph is having a nice time. 40 minutes later, one of the men in it is on his knees on a driveway in the dark, and the woman in the green cardigan is standing in a doorway saying a sentence she will repeat, more or less unchanged, for the next 14 months, and then in a courtroom, and a pediatrician is talking to a dispatcher in a voice that has gone somewhere he has never taken it before. I'm Nathan. I want to tell you a story where nobody strikes anybody, nobody steals anything, nobody has an affair, and nobody plans a crime. And a child very nearly dies anyway, in a house full of people who all loved him, because of the way families decide who to stand behind. Hendrick Ziegler was 36, and he tested milk for a living. I want to be exact about that job, because it is the whole engine of this story, and almost nobody knows it exists. The Hasbrook Dairy Cooperative takes in raw milk from about 260 farms across 3 counties, and every single tanker that backs into that plant is sampled before a drop of it goes anywhere. Hendrick worked in the quality lab on the receiving side. In a shift, he would run something in the region of 60 to 90 samples. Butterfat and protein by infrared. Somatic cell count, which tells you about the health of the herd. Antibiotic residue, which is a pass-fail test and which, if it fails, sends an entire tanker, 8,000 gallons, somebody's month, down the drain. And it is the lab technician who makes that call, and nobody argues with him. And twice a shift, on the processing side, he verified the fortification. Fluid milk in the United States is fortified. Vitamin D goes in on the way through, at a rate set by regulation, metered in by a small pump on a line, and somebody has to check that the pump is actually doing it. That somebody, on the day shift, was Hendrick Ziegler, and had been for 15 years. He knew the target. He knew the tolerance. He knew what happened to a batch that came in low, which was that it did not leave the building. He was, by trade and by temperament, a man who did not have opinions about what was in things. He had numbers. I want to give you one working morning of his, because it is the counterweight to everything that happens later. A tanker backs into the receiving bay at 5:40 in the morning. The driver has already pulled a sample on the farm and another one in the bay, and those samples come to Hendrick in a rack, cold, labeled with a producer number and nothing else. No name, no face, no history. He does not know whose milk it is, and he does not want to know. That is deliberate. That is the design. He runs it. If the antibiotic screen comes up positive, the load is condemned. 8,000 gallons. That is somebody's entire month. And depending on the farm, it can be the difference between a family staying in business and not. And Hendrick has done it. By his own count, 19 times in 15 years. He has never once had to argue about it. Nobody has ever come to the lab and said, "But I have farmed here for 40 years." Nobody has said, "But my father sold to this plant." Nobody has said, "Designed by whom, honey?" Because the number is not an accusation, and it is not a judgment about the farmer's character, and every single person in that industry, up and down, has agreed in advance that the number wins. That is what a measurement is for. That is the entire social technology of it. It takes the question off the person. 9 months from that morning, a man who does this every single working day is going to sit in a kitchen and not ask what is in a jar, because in his own house the question would have had a person attached to it. Hold on to that. It takes him 9 months to remember it. He met Everly Newkirk at a wedding when he was 28 and she was 23, and they were married 2 years later. And by every account from both sides, it was a good marriage. She was warm and funny and slightly disorganized, and she laughed at his jokes, which were not good. He was steady in the way that people mean when they say a man is steady, which is that nothing about him was interesting and everything about him was reliable. The Newkirks were a big family, and the Zieglers were a small one. Hendrick had one brother. Everly had 3 siblings, 5 aunts, a great many cousins, and a mother. I need to introduce Berdine Newkirk properly, and I want to do it the way Hendrick would have described her in the first 8 years he knew her, which is with real affection. Berdine was 62. She was small and busy, and had an enormous laugh, and she was the person that entire family organized itself around. She hosted every holiday. She remembered every birthday, including in-laws, including second cousins, and she did not just remember them, she showed up. When Hendrick's own mother had a knee replaced, Berdine drove 40 minutes each way for 9 days running to sit with a woman she was not related to, because, she said, that is what you do. She had raised 6 children. Her husband died when the youngest was 3, and she raised the last 3 of them on a school cafeteria wage, and she never once, in 19 years, took anything from anybody. And I want to be careful here, because the temptation with a story like this is to go back through a woman's life and find the crack. There is one, and it is not hidden, and it did not look like a crack at the time. Berdine Newkirk had been, for most of her adult life, a person nobody asked for anything. She was the youngest of 7 children in a family that had no money. She left school at 17. She worked in a school kitchen for 22 years, and then in the office of a feed store. She had no title, no qualification, no letters after her name, and nobody in her life had ever once treated her as an authority on anything at all. And then, at 43, a young woman at church asked her how she had managed with 6 on nothing, and she told her, and it worked, and the young woman came back and said thank you. I do not think you can understand this story unless you understand what that must have felt like. By 50, she was the person the young mothers in 3 counties called at 2 in the morning. Not a doctor, not a nurse, not a midwife, just the woman who had done it 6 times and would pick up the phone. She sat up with strangers' babies. She drove to their houses. She was, in a completely genuine way, the most useful person a lot of those women had. Nothing that follows is an argument that she was a fraud. She was not. She was the real thing, for 19 years, and that is exactly why nobody could stop her. And she had a thing she believed about babies. I am going to describe it carefully, and I want you to notice that it does not sound insane. That is the point. Nothing in this story sounds insane at the time. Berdine believed that commercial infant formula was, in her word, engineered, that it was a manufactured product sold at a profit by companies that did not care about anybody's child, and that the generation of babies raised on it had come out with more allergies, more asthma, and more of everything than the generation before. She was not entirely making that up. She was drawing a line between 2 real facts and calling it a road, which is what all of this is. And she had an alternative, which she called the preparation. It was, at its base, goat's milk. Whole goat's milk from a farm out on the Chelsea Road, cut with filtered water, with a small amount of blackstrap molasses for iron, a spoon of a rice and oat gruel she cooked down herself, and, this is the part that mattered, nothing else. No supplement, no drops, nothing from a pharmacy. She was proud of that. It was the cleanest thing you could give a child, she said, and she had raised all of hers on it. And look at them. She had also given the recipe away, free, in her own handwriting on a card, to any young mother who asked, for 19 years. The circle of women who used it and swore by it ran to something over 52 families across Ellenwood County and 2 counties either side. There was no business. There was no money. She never sold a single thing to a single person in her life. And I want you to hold on to that too, because it turns out to be the hardest problem in the whole case. There is one more thing about the preparation that the state's expert dwelt on for a long time at trial, and it is worth having now, because it explains why the harm was invisible for so long. Goat's milk is not poison. It is a food. It is drunk by a very large fraction of the human species. What it is not, and what no unmodified animal milk is a complete diet for a human infant under a year. And the reasons are boring and specific, and nobody outside pediatrics knows them. It is low in folate. It is low in vitamin B12. It has more protein and more mineral load than an infant kidney is designed to clear. which is why it is usually cut with water, and cutting it with water dilutes what little of everything else is in there. It contains, effectively, no vitamin D. And its calcium and phosphorus come in a ratio that is right for a kid, the animal, 4 legs, and wrong for a baby. The molasses in Berdine's version was there for iron, and it does contain iron, and that was probably why none of those babies were anemic, which is the one thing that would have been caught at a routine visit by a finger prick. So what you got was a child who gained weight, who was not anemic, who looked well fed, and whose skeleton was quietly failing. There is no line on a growth chart for that. There is no color it makes a baby go. Hendrick Ziegler was born on the 2nd of February, 7 pounds and 1 ounce, healthy, loud. Everly breastfed him, and it went well for 5 weeks, and then it stopped going well. Supply dropped. It happens to a great many women, and it is nobody's fault, and it is also, for a certain kind of woman, in a certain kind of family, the most humiliating thing that has ever happened to her. She cried about it. She cried about it for days, and her mother, who is a genuinely kind person, moved in for a month to help. That is where this starts. Not with malice. With a woman driving over with a bag and taking the night feed so her daughter could sleep. Hendrick was on days at the plant, 5 to 1, up at 3:30 in the morning. He was, by week 7, sleeping in the spare room so as not to wake the household when his alarm went. Which means that for the first critical stretch of that child's life, the two people who made the decisions about what went into him were his mother, who was exhausted and grieving something she could not name, and his grandmother, who was sure. They started the preparation at week 7. Hendrick found out a week after that, when he came home and saw the pan on the stove and the jars in the fridge, and asked what it was. There was a conversation. It was not a fight. He said he would rather they used formula. Berdine said the formula had constipated him, which it had, mildly, as it does. Everly said her mother had raised all of hers. Hendrick said something about how formula is designed to be complete, and Berdine said, and this is the line he repeated to investigators 9 months later almost word for word, "Designed by whom, honey?" And he did not have an answer. In that kitchen, at 9 at night, after a 14-hour day, to designed by whom? Here is the thing that I think about most in this whole story. Hendrick Ziegler is a man who, at work, 5 days a week, holds a legal veto over 8,000 gallons of milk on the basis of a number. He could have said, "I would like to know what is in it." That is not an accusation. That is his actual job, and it would have taken him about 4 days. He did not say it, because it was his mother-in-law's kitchen, and his wife was crying upstairs, and he was 29 hours into a week that had already gone wrong, and because when you are inside a family the question, what is actually in this, sounds like an attack on a person, rather than a question about a substance. That distinction is the entire story. Remember it. Corbett was a calm baby. Everybody said so. He was the easiest of all the Newkirk grandchildren by a mile. He did not fuss, he did not roll around. He would sit propped against a cushion for 40 minutes and just watch. Berdine said it was the preparation. She said it every time, cheerfully, at every gathering, and every time she said it, everybody in the room heard a small proof. He was a calm baby, because he was too weak to be anything else. I want to walk you through what was actually happening, because it is not complicated, and because it is one of the oldest illnesses there is. Vitamin D is not really a vitamin. It is a hormone your skin makes out of sunlight, and its job is to pull calcium out of your food and put it into your bones. A baby is born with a store of it from his mother, and that store runs out somewhere between 2 and 4 months. And after that he has to get it from somewhere, from sunlight on skin, from a supplement, or from a fortified food. Breast milk contains almost none. That is why every pediatric body on earth tells breastfeeding mothers to give a daily drop. Formula is fortified. That is exactly what Berdine objected to, and it is exactly why it is safe. And goat's milk cut with water and molasses and oat gruel contains essentially none at all, and is also low in calcium relative to phosphorus, and the phosphorus makes the calcium problem worse rather than better. So from about month 3, that child's body had been asked to build a skeleton with nothing to build it out of. What it does then is not dramatic. That is why nobody sees it. The body starts pulling calcium out of the bone to keep the blood level up, because blood calcium is what runs the nerves and the heart, and it is defended to the last. So the bones go soft, not brittle, soft. And at the ends of the growing bones, at the wrists and the ankles and along the front of the ribs, the growth plate stops turning into bone and just keeps making cartilage, and it piles up, and it swells. Along the front of the chest, where every rib meets its cartilage, that swelling makes a row of hard little knots. There are, in a baby, something like 14 of them on each side, evenly spaced, running down from the collarbone. They have had a name since the 1600s. It is the rachitic rosary, because it feels like beads. You cannot see it. There is no rash, no color, no lump you would notice in a photograph. It is under the skin, and unless you are pressing your fingers along a baby's chest with intent, you will not find it. You will find it if you hold him against your shoulder, with a flat hand on his back, and your fingers up under his arm, which is exactly how a pediatrician holds a baby. There were other signs over those months, and I want to list them, because every family that this happens to spends the rest of their lives listing them. I want to slow down here and take that summer month by month, because the thing people get wrong about a story like this is that they imagine a family ignoring something obvious. Nobody ignored anything. The information arrived in pieces, over 5 months, in the form of small facts that each had a good explanation attached to them by somebody everybody trusted. He sweated. Not everywhere. His head, at night, badly enough that Everly changed the sheet under him most mornings. That is a classic sign, and it is on page 1 of any textbook, and it looks, to a family, like a baby who runs hot. Burdine said it meant he was thriving. He was late. He had no head control worth the name at 5 months. He did not roll. He did not push up. Everly mentioned it twice, and both times a woman with a house full of grown children told her that boys are slower and that her own third had not rolled until 8 months. And that was true, and it was also not relevant. His wrists looked wrong. Everly noticed this. She said it out loud, in July, in the kitchen, that his wrists looked thick, that his sleeves were tight at the cuff and loose everywhere else. And Burdine took his hand and looked at it and said he had his grandfather's hands, and everybody laughed, and that was the end of it. There was also the thing with the sitting, which Hendrick did notice, and which he has never forgiven himself for. In August, at a cousin's christening, Everly's sister put her own daughter, 5.5 months, 2 weeks younger than Corbett, on a rug next to him. The girl sat up. Not perfectly. She wobbled and put a hand down, but she sat. Corbett could not. He went over sideways within about 2 seconds and lay there and looked pleased about it, and everybody laughed, and Burdine said, from the sofa, that this one was going to be the thinker. Hendrick told investigators later that he stood in that room and felt something go past him. A flicker, a 2-second thing, gone before it had a shape, and then somebody handed him a plate. That happens. That is the most common event in this entire category of story, and almost nobody ever says it out loud, so I will. The human alarm system is not a bell, it is a flicker, and it goes off on a Sunday in a room full of people you love while somebody is handing you a plate. If you only act on the ones that arrive as a bell, you will act perhaps twice in your life. And they missed the 6-month check, not deliberately. The practice rescheduled twice. There was a summer stomach bug going round. Everly moved it to September and then to October, and Burdine, who never had a bad word for anybody, mentioned once that those appointments are mostly for selling you things. Hendrick, meanwhile, was working 60-hour weeks through the summer flush, which is the season when the milk comes in heaviest and the lab does not stop. Now, Jefferson Ziegler was Hendrick's older brother, 41, a general pediatrician in a practice 90 minutes away. He was not a big presence in that family. He came to 2 things a year. He had seen Corbett exactly twice, once in the hospital in February and once in April, and both times the baby had been in a car seat or asleep on a bed. On the 19th of October, Burdine hosted a birthday dinner for one of the cousins, and 13 people came, and Jefferson came because it was on his weekend off. And at 10 to 7, somebody took a photograph, and at about 7:15, over dessert, Burdine, who was holding Corbett, who was always holding Corbett, said the thing she said. She said it to the room, delighted. The way you hand somebody something good. Hold my grandson. He's so warm. Jefferson took him. I have the timeline from 3 separate statements and they agree. Jefferson Ziegler held his nephew for somewhere between 8 and 12 seconds before he stood up. He took him through the kitchen and out the side door onto the driveway, and Hendrick, who had seen his brother's face change, followed him. Outside, Jefferson had the baby laid along his forearm under the porch light, and he was running 2 fingers down the left side of the child's chest, and then the right side, twice, and he was breathing wrong. He said, "Call an ambulance, now." And Hendrick said what anybody says, which is, "What? Why?" And his brother looked at him and said the sentence that Hendrick Ziegler has said, in interviews, and once on a stand, he will hear until the day he dies. He said, "Didn't you feel it when you held him?" And Hendrick said no, because he had not. Because he had held that child 10,000 times and he had never once run his fingers down his ribs with intent, because why would you? And Jefferson, with his voice going, said, "That's a rosary. Those are his ribs. Hendrick, his bones are, he's got no calcium in him. He's warm because he's fighting something and he can't afford to fight anything. Call them." Hendrick went down on the driveway, not dramatically. His legs stopped holding him and he ended up on his knees on the concrete with a phone in his hand. And Jefferson took the phone off him and called it in himself, and gave the dispatcher a set of words that got a paramedic unit rolling in under 90 seconds. Burdine came to the side door and stood in it and said, "He is a healthy child, Jefferson." She said it in a voice of absolute, unshakable, completely sincere certainty. Every witness says the same thing. She was not frightened and she was not lying. She meant it. Before the ambulance, there are 90 seconds in that driveway that I want to give you properly, because 2 of the 3 people in them will spend the next year and a half being defined by what they did. Jefferson Ziegler, 41, is not a dramatic man. His colleagues describe him as the most cautious partner in the practice, the one who orders one more test than anybody else and gets teased for it. He has said since that he was not sure. He says he was about 80% sure, and that 80% in a 7-month-old with a fever is 100%, and that the worst thing he could have been was wrong and embarrassed at a family dinner. Everly came out and asked what was happening, and Jefferson said the word rickets, and she said, out loud, "That's not a real thing anymore. A lot of people think that. It is what everyone is taught, a Victorian illness, chimney sweeps, cod liver oil, gone. It is not gone. It never went anywhere. It went down, hard, when countries started fortifying milk in the 1930s. And it has been coming back up in specific pockets for 20 years. And the pockets are exactly this: babies who are not on formula and not on a supplement." And Burdine came out and said the sentence. And here is the thing about the sentence. She did not say, "He's fine." She said, "He is a healthy child, Jefferson." And she used his name. And she used the name because she was talking to him as a person, not a doctor. She was reminding a nephew-in-law that he was at a family dinner. That is the last moment in this story when it could have gone a different way. If she had said, at that door, "What do you feel?" everything after it is different. She had 19 years and 6 children and every reason on earth not to ask. The ambulance came at 7:31. Corbett Ziegler had a seizure in the back of it at 7:44, 4 minutes out from Ellenwood County Memorial, and it was a hypocalcemic seizure. His blood calcium had finally fallen off the edge that his skeleton had been holding it up over for months. They stopped it with intravenous calcium, and they got him to the pediatric unit, and then, at 2 in the morning, into a transport to the children's hospital in the city. Here are the numbers, because this story is about numbers, and about a man who was allowed to forget he knew how to read them. Serum calcium on arrival, 6.1 milligrams per deciliter. Normal for an infant is around 9 to 11. At that level, you seize. Alkaline phosphatase, the enzyme that goes up when bone is being frantically remodeled, 1,940. The top of the reference range for a baby is about 450. 25-hydroxyvitamin D, which is the number that tells you the store, 6 nanograms per milliliter. Deficiency starts below 20. That is a number a pediatric endocrinologist sees a handful of times in a career. And a wrist film. If you have never seen the X-ray of a rachitic wrist, the ends of the 2 forearm bones, which should be a clean, straight edge, look eaten, frayed, cupped, like the end of a stick that has been chewed. Radiologists write, cupping and fraying. It is one of the most recognizable images in pediatrics, and any radiologist on Earth calls it from across a room. There was also a chest infection, which is what the warmth was, and which is what would have killed him inside a week or two, because a baby with a soft rib cage cannot cough properly, and a baby with no calcium cannot fight anything. The endocrinologist who took the case was a woman called Houston Rainwater, and at 4 in the morning in a corridor she told Hendrick and Everly 2 things. The first was that this was completely reversible and that in 8 or 9 months the films would look normal and that their son was going to be fine. The second was that she was required by law to make a report, and that she had already made it, and that she was sorry. That report is what turned this from a medical event into the 14 months that follow. I want to be fair to everybody here, including the county, so let me put the child protection people's position plainly, because when you hear it, you will understand why it went the way it did. A 7-month-old presents with a seizure, calcium of 6, alkaline phosphatase of 1900, no vitamin D worth measuring, a chest infection, and metabolic bone disease visible on plain film. He has not been seen by a doctor since he was 4 months old. He has been fed, for 5 months, on a homemade preparation that both parents were aware of. From the outside, and the outside is where every investigator lives, that is a neglect case with 2 parents in it, both of them. It does not matter that one of them was at a dairy plant 14 hours a day. He lived there. He knew what the child was eating. He said he objected and did nothing, which is, if you have ever read one of these files, the single most common sentence a father says. The caseworker was a man named Axel Kobe, 38, and he was not a fool, and he was not a villain. He had a file that said 2 parents, and then the family gave him a story. I want you to watch this part closely, because it is the most human and the ugliest thing in this whole account, and it did not require anybody to decide to be evil. Berdine Newkirk did not say, "I did this." She could not. Not because she was covering herself. I genuinely do not believe, having read everything, that she was thinking about herself at all in that first fortnight. She could not say it, because saying it would mean that her own grown children, and a great many other people's children, and 19 years, had been wrong. A person does not get there in a fortnight. Most people never get there at all. What she said instead was that the child had had a virus, that hospitals scare people, that they had wanted a supplement in him since he was born, and it was the family's choice not to, and that Hendrick had always been on board. And Everly, 31 years old, 4 days out of an ambulance, having been told by a doctor that her son nearly died because of what she fed him, sat in a room with Axel Kobe and was asked whose decision the feeding had been. And she said, "It was both of us. It was ours." Hendrick was fine with it. I have thought about why she said that more than I have thought about anything else in this story, and I do not think it was to save her mother, and I do not think it was to hurt her husband. I think a woman who had just been told she had done this to her own baby reached for the only sentence in the world that made her not the only one holding it, and her mother was standing beside her when she said it, and her husband was not in the room. The safety plan was signed on the 28th of October. Under it, Corbett would be discharged to the care of a non-offending adult relative while the assessment ran. Hendrick was to leave the home, contact supervised. The non-offending adult relative, approved by the county, on paper, correctly, with no rule broken anywhere, was the maternal grandmother. Berdine Newkirk took that child home to her own house on the 6th of November, with a bag of prescriptions and a feeding plan from a children's hospital, and Hendrick Ziegler moved into a room above his brother's garage 90 minutes away. I want to say one thing about Axel Kobe, because it would be easy and wrong to make him the villain of the middle act. He carried, at that time, 31 open cases. He had 11 years in, and he had seen, in those 11 years, a very large number of fathers say the exact sentence Hendrick Ziegler said to him, "It was not me, it was her family. I said I didn't want it." He is not required to guess right about which of them are telling the truth. He is required to keep the child safe while somebody else works it out. And the placement, the thing that reads as monstrous, putting the baby with the grandmother, was not a mistake in any procedural sense. Berdine Newkirk had no record of anything. She was not a parent in the case. She had a house, a clean check, and 6 adult children who would all say she was the best mother in Ellenwood County. Under the rules as written, she was the single most placeable person in that family. That is how these things happen. Not because somebody breaks a rule. Because the rules ask, is this adult safe? And the honest answer, on every form the county has, was yes. He spent the next several weeks doing what everybody does, and it did not work. He told the truth to Axel Kobe, twice, in detail, and Axel Kobe wrote it down and did nothing with it, because a father saying it was her mother, not me, in a neglect case, is not information, it is the weather. He got a lawyer, who told him the honest thing, which is that a family court is not a place where you prove that somebody else did it. It is a place where you prove that you are safe, and that the fastest road to his son was to go to the parenting classes and the nutrition education, and take his medicine, and wait 9 months. He called Everly. She stopped answering by the second week. He went to 2 of the Newkirk aunts, both of whom loved him, and both of whom said, in different words, the same thing. Hendrick, she is 62, she has lost a husband, and now you want to put this on her? He is going to be fine. Let it go. And I want to name what that is, because it is the moral of the whole thing, and it comes up in every family I have ever read about. That family was not choosing Berdine over Hendrick because they thought she was right. Most of them, privately, by December, had a bad feeling. They were choosing her because she was the one who could not survive being wrong, and because standing behind the person who cannot survive it is what that family understood love to be. Loyalty is a real virtue. It does not come with a censor. Point it at the wrong thing, and it will defend that thing with everything it has, and the people it costs are the ones who cannot yet speak. Somewhere in the middle of December, in a room above a garage, Hendrick Ziegler stopped trying to be believed. He has said, since, that it happened while he was doing something completely unrelated. He was reading a spec sheet for work, because he was still working, because the plant does not care about your life, and he was looking at a certificate of analysis for a load of condensed skim, which is a page of numbers with a lab's name at the top. And the thing that went through him was, nobody at the plant has ever once believed me about anything. That is the actual sentence he used. Nobody has ever believed him. Nobody has ever had to. He does not go to his supervisor and say he thinks a tanker is bad. He runs it, and the number is the number, and the tanker either goes in or goes down the drain, and his opinion has never been requested by anybody in 15 years. He had spent 8 weeks trying to get people to believe a thing that could simply be measured. The preparation still existed. Berdine was still making it, not for Corbett, who was on a hospital feeding plan she was following to the letter because a court had told her to, but for herself and for whoever asked, because 52 families were still using it, and she had told all of them that what happened to her grandson was a virus and a hospital's overreaction. Getting a sample was the easiest part of the whole story. His sister-in-law's cousin used it. He asked for a jar. She gave him a jar and a photocopy of the card, and did not think about it for a second, because there was nothing secret about any of it. That is the thing about Berdine. She was completely open. It was the openness that made her dangerous, and it is also what finished her. He did not take it to a hospital, or the police, or the county. He took it to work, not to the plant's own lab. That would have been misuse of his employer's equipment, and he knew exactly what that would cost him. He drove it 40 minutes to Chelsea, to an independent agricultural laboratory that does forage and feed analysis for dairy farms, the sort of place that tells a farmer what is actually in his corn silage so he can balance a ration. He had sent them samples professionally for years. He filled in the same submission form he had filled in 100 times, ticked the boxes for a full mineral and vitamin panel, wrote liquid feed, unknown formulation, in the description field, because that is literally what it was, paid $260 on his own card, and drove home. The 9 days he waited for that report were, he says, the worst 9 days of the whole thing, worse than the hospital, because in the hospital there had been something to do. He worked. He went to the parenting class on a Tuesday and the nutrition education on a Thursday, both of which he has said were genuinely good, and both of which he sat through knowing that everyone in the room believed he was there, because he had starved his son's bones. He drove past his own house twice and did not stop. He got a 15-minute supervised visit on a Saturday in a county building, and his son did not know him, which is what happens to a 7-month-old in that time, and which is not the child's fault, and which is a specific kind of unbearable. And he did the arithmetic that everybody in his position does, which is, If this comes back and it is fine, then it was me. Then all of it was me. Because if the preparation is fine, then the only variable left is the house, and the house is his. He has said he had it about 60-40, that he was about to find out he had been wrong. The report came back in 9 days. I am going to read you the part that mattered. Calcium, 0.11% of dry matter. Phosphorus, 0.19%. Calcium to phosphorus ratio, 0.58 to 1, which is to say, more phosphorus than calcium, when a growing body needs roughly twice as much calcium as phosphorus. Vitamin D3, below the limit of detection. There was a comments box at the bottom of the report. The ruminant nutritionist who signed it off had typed one line into it, because that is what that box is for, and because he had a sample in front of him that made no sense as a feed. He wrote, inverted, D3 absent, not suitable as a sole ration for a growing animal. A growing animal. Hendrick Ziegler sat in a truck in a car park in Chelsea and read that sentence, and then read it again, and then he did something I find very hard to talk about, which is that he laughed for about a minute and a half, alone, and then he could not stop crying. Because there it was. Not an opinion. Not a father's word against a grandmother's word. Not a hospital versus a family. $260 of ordinary agricultural chemistry from a company whose main business is telling farmers whether their hay is any good, saying, in the flattest possible language, that you could not legally sell this as a complete feed for a calf. And then he did the second thing, and this is the part that turned a piece of paper into a case, because a lab report on a jar does not prove what went into his son. Burdine could say, and did say, that his jar was not her jar, that he had made it himself, that anybody could put anything in a jar. And she would have been hard to disprove, so he did not use it as evidence. He used it as an invitation. He wrote out, by hand, 61 copies of a single short note, and he drove around 3 counties for 11 days putting them in mailboxes and handing them to women at church car parks and at a feed store and outside a school. The note did not accuse anybody of anything. It did not mention Burdine Newkirk's name. It said, roughly, my son is 7 months old. He was fed the preparation from 7 weeks. 2 weeks ago he had a seizure. He has rickets. His bones were soft. I am not saying anybody meant anything. I am asking you to do one thing. Ask your doctor for a wrist x-ray and a vitamin D level. It takes 10 minutes. It is free with any insurance, and it does not hurt. If your child is fine, you will have lost an afternoon. Here is what my son's report said. Here is what a laboratory said about the preparation, and he stapled the lab report to it. A page of numbers with a company's name at the top. It did not go smoothly. I want to be honest about that, because the version where a man hands out a note and the county rises up is not what happened. Of the 61 families, 11 called Burdine before they did anything else, and Burdine called 2 of her sons, and one of her sons, Granville Newkirk, 34, who is not a bad man either, drove to the plant car park and waited for Hendrick's shift to end and told him, in a car park, in front of 2 co-workers, that he was a coward who was trying to put a 62-year-old woman in prison to get out of his own case. 7 families wrote to the county to complain about him. 3 of those letters are in the file, and they are all variations of the same thing. This man is harassing a grandmother. 2 women threw the note away in front of him. 26 families went. 19 of those children had a vitamin D level below 20. 7 had radiographic changes. 2, a 9-month-old girl in Ellenwood County, and a boy of 13 months 2 counties over, had frank, unmistakable rickets, and one of them, Kane Tidwell, had an alkaline phosphatase over 2,000 and was admitted the same day. His mother's name was Aurelie Tidwell. She was 27. She had been given the card by Burdine at a baby shower and had followed it exactly because a woman who had raised a houseful had told her it was the best thing she could do. When pediatricians in 3 counties file 7 cases of nutritional rickets inside 3 weeks, that is not 6 families having bad luck. That is a cluster, and clusters go somewhere. The state health department opened an investigation on the 14th of January, and a state investigation does not care who is anybody's mother. And the case against Hendrick Ziegler came apart in about a fortnight, for a reason that had nothing to do with him being believed. Axel Kobe, who had been doing this for 11 years, got a call from the state about a cluster of rickets cases in his county, traced to a single homemade infant feed, and the name attached to that feed was the name of the non-offending relative he had placed a child with. He drove to Berdine Newkirk's house on the 16th of January and removed Corbett Ziegler to a foster placement, and then he sat in his car for a while. The hearing was on the 3rd of February, which was Corbett's first birthday. Hendrick's lawyer did almost nothing, which was correct. He put in the lab report. He put in the note, all 61 copies of which were identical and none of which named anybody. He put in the state's preliminary finding. He put in the 26 families and the 19 levels and the 7 films. And then he put in the thing that ended it, which was not evidence at all. It was a subpoenaed copy of a handwritten card in Berdine Newkirk's handwriting, dated by her the way she dated all of them, given to Aurelie Tidwell at a baby shower in the March of the previous year. Berdine had written and dated 61 of them over 19 years, and she had never once thought of them as anything but a kindness, which is exactly what they were, and exactly what made them unanswerable. Aurelie Ziegler asked to speak. She was not required to. Her own attorney advised against it. She said, and it is in the transcript, that she had told the caseworker in October that the decision had been both of theirs, and that this was not true. She said her husband had asked for formula twice and had been told no twice, and that the second time she had been the one who told him no. She said she had been sleeping about 3 hours a night and she had believed her mother the way you believe the floor. Then she said, I wanted on the record that he was right and I made him the reason. Corbett went home to both his parents on the 22nd of February with the case still open and a plan attached, and it stayed open for another 7 months, and then it closed. There is one more scene from the hearing I have to give you, because it is the only moment in this entire story where anybody says the true thing at the time. Berdine Newkirk was not a party to the child protection case and did not have to be there, and she came anyway and sat at the back, because she had come to everything for 40 years. When Hendrick's lawyer read out the comments box, K to P inverted, D3 absent, not suitable as a sole ration for a growing animal, there was the particular kind of silence that happens in a small courtroom when everybody hears something they cannot unhear. And Berdine said, from the back, not loudly, and it is in the transcript because the court reporter caught it, that's for cows. She was not being defiant, she was explaining. She had understood, correctly and instantly, what the document was, and her mind had done the only thing it could do with it, which was find the reason it did not apply to her. The judge said, quite gently, that the calcium requirement of a growing mammal does not know what building it is in. What happened to everybody? Berdine Newkirk was charged in June with 7 counts of endangering the welfare of a child, not for her grandson, for the children of other people whose parents had followed a written instruction she had handed them and dated in her own hand. She pleaded not guilty and went to trial in the following spring, and she was convicted on 5 of the 7 counts, and she got 2.5 to 7 years, and she was 64 when she went in. She has never said she was wrong, not in an allocution, not in a letter, not to any of her children. She said, in the only statement she ever made, that she had raised all of hers the same way and that her grown children were walking around Pennsylvania and that nobody had asked her about them. And here is the thing that broke that family in half, and it is the last piece of this I want to give you. Somebody did ask about them, the state did, and when they went back through it, the grown children were 1 short. There had been a 7th Newkirk baby, a girl, born in 1987, who died at 9 months, and the certificate says, sudden infant death, which in 1987 was what a certificate said when nobody knew. Her older sister remembered and testified that the baby's legs had been bowed, that she had sweated through her sheets, and that their mother had said she was teething. There was no autopsy. There is no proof, and there never will be, and the state did not charge it, and I am not going to sit here and tell you what killed that child, because I do not know. But everybody in that courtroom did the arithmetic, and Berdine Newkirk's children did it too, and that is the thing that actually ended it, not the verdict. 5 middle-aged people sitting in a row understanding, in about 4 seconds, that the thing their mother had been proudest of for 19 years might have taken their sister. Aurelie Tidwell's son recovered completely. All of them did. Every child in that cluster, without exception. That is the mercy in this story. and it is worth saying out loud. Rickets, caught, is one of the most completely fixable serious illnesses in medicine. You give the child vitamin D and calcium, and within about a month or so, the blood chemistry is normal. And within 8 or 9 months, the bone remodels, and the films come back clean, and there is nothing left. Hendrick Ziegler walked at 14 months, which is well inside normal. He is 3 now. There is a very faint residual bowing in his left tibia that a pediatric orthopedist looked at and said would correct itself by school age, and it has. Everly and Hendrick are still married. That surprised me. They did a lot of work, most of it in a room with a therapist in Chelsea, and Hendrick has said one thing about it publicly that I have not been able to improve on. He said, she said it in October, and she unsaid it in February in front of a judge, and I have decided that 4 months of being wrong out loud is not more than a marriage can carry. The mother's circle does not exist. Some of those women have not spoken to each other since. 2 of them wrote to Berdine in prison. One of them, Aurelie Tidwell, testified for the state, and then went to the sentencing and asked the judge for leniency, which nobody expected, and which I think about a lot. So, the thing I want to leave you with, and it is not about vitamins. Every person in that dining room on the 19th of October loved that baby. Every single one. Nobody in this story wanted anything bad. The grandmother who very nearly killed him had driven 40 minutes each way for 9 days to sit with a woman she wasn't related to. What went wrong is that a family had a rule about who you stand behind, and the rule was, stand behind whoever cannot survive being wrong. That rule is not stupid. It is where most of the decent things families do come from. You do stand behind the one who is fragile. You do protect the one who has already lost the most. But it has no censor in it at all. It does not check whether the fragile person is also the dangerous one. And when those two are the same human being, a family will close around the harm like a hand. And I do not think you fix that with suspicion. I think you fix it with one unremarkable habit. And it is the one Hendrick Ziegler had all along and did not use for 9 months. And he has said it better than I can. He says that at work, when he wants to know what is in something, nobody's feelings are involved, because a number is not an opinion about a person. You are allowed to ask what is in it, in your own house, about your own child, out loud, at the table, in front of everybody. It is not an accusation, and it is not disloyalty, and it does not mean you think anybody is a liar. He waited 9 months to ask, because in a family, the question sounded like a verdict on a person he loved. It was never a verdict on anybody. It was a question about a jar. If you want to know where that lab report is now, the one that cost $260, the one that says a growing animal, the one that ended a 19-year-old belief and a family, and put a 64-year-old woman in a state prison, it is not in a museum, and it is not framed on anybody's wall. It is in a filing cabinet in a low brick building outside Chelsea, Pennsylvania, in a drawer of paper copies kept for 7 years, filed under a sample number, between a soybean silage from a farm on the county line and a total mixed ration from a herd of 200 Holsteins. Nobody at that laboratory has any idea. I'm Nathan,